Good day everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about how the pre-service teachers can discuss the nature and characteristics of authentic assessment and related terms, differentiate authentic and traditional assessment, reflect on the importance and applications of authentic assessment, and also how to make connections between the principles of high-quality assessment and the development and use of authentic assessment techniques and tools within and across teaching areas.
Good afternoon everyone. We've been learning about high quality assessment and authentic assessment. So to dive deeper, how do you think the purpose of assessment influences the choice of methods used?
Good question. I think the purpose of assessment dictates the methods because it determines what we are trying to measure. For example, if the purpose is to assess critical thinking, we might use method like a case study rather than a multiple choice test. Keith, do you think aligning assessment method with learning targets is always straightforward?
Not necessary. It can be challenging because learning targets often involve complex skills like creativity or traditional problem solving, which is harder to assess with traditional methods. That's why diverse assessment methods are necessary. What do you think, Tyrone? How does this complexity affects the accuracy of assessment?
I agree that complexity can impact accuracy. For example, if an assessment method doesn't align well with the learning target, it might not accurately reflect students' abilities. This could lead to either underestimating or overestimating their knowledge. Brian, what strategies do you think teachers can use to maintain accuracy while dealing with complex learning targets?
Okay, so teachers can use rubrics with clear criteria to ensure consistency and accuracy, especially for complex tasks. They can also incorporate peer reviews or self-assessments to triangulate data and get more accurate picture of student understanding. That being said, how do you think sampling plays a role in this?
Sampling is crucial because it ensures that the assessment is representative of the entire curriculum. If we sample well, we can get a good sense of a student's overall understanding without having to test every single detail. But it's a balancing act. If the sample is too narrow, we miss out on critical areas. And if it's too broad, we overwhelm the students. Via, how do you think authentic assessment address these challenges differently than traditional assessments?
So, authentic assessments tackle these challenges by focusing on real-world tasks that integrate multiple skills. They often provide a more holistic view of student learning because they simulate real-life scenarios, requiring students to apply what they've learned in meaningful ways. For instance, a project-based assessment might cover various targets simultaneously, such as critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity. But Catherine, how do you think the characteristics of authentic assessment contribute to deeper learning?
The real-world relevance and the demand for higher-order thinking in authentic assessments push students to not just recall information, but to synthesize and apply it. This leads to deeper learning because students engage with the material in a meaningful context. How do you all think this type of assessment could change the way we approach learning in the classroom?
It encourages us to think beyond the just passing exam. When we know we'll be assessed on our ability to apply knowledge in real-world situation, we're more motivated to truly understand the material. This could lead to more engagement and active learning. Catherine, how do you think this shift affects the role of feedback in the learning process?
Feedback becomes even more critical because it's not just about correcting mistakes, but guiding students on how to improve their performance in realistic tasks. Continuous feedback in authentic assessments helps students refine their skills and deepen their understanding. Brian, do you think that the emphasis on authentic assessment changes the traditional teacher-student dynamic?
Okay, definitely. Authentic assessment often require a more collaborative approach where teachers act more as facilitators or coaches rather than just evaluators. This can create a more interactive and supportive learning environment. It's like we're all working together toward a common goal of applying knowledge meaningfully rather than just aiming for a grade.
Ako naman.
Okay, what are your thoughts on this, Via?
I agree. This approach fosters a deeper connection between students and teachers because the focus shifts to learning and growth rather than just outcomes. It encourages a more formative assessment process where the emphasis is on continuous improvement. This in turn can lead to more personalized learning experience. I think we all benefit from this shift toward authentic assessment. Do you think?
Now, let's kick off our discussions by exploring why we should use authentic assessment. Why do you all think are the key principles behind authentic assessment? Brian?
Good question. One principle that comes to mind is relevance. Authentic assessments are designed to reflect a real-world task. But how does this principle actually enhance student learning?
That's a great point, Brian. I think it enhances learning because it engages students in applying their knowledge in practical situations, which helps them to understand the material on a deeper level. But that makes me wonder, how does this differ from objectives of traditional assessment?
Tyron, traditional assessments often focus on recalling information, like in multiple choice tests or short answers. Authentic assessments, on the other hand, require higher order thinking and problem solving. Can anyone explain how this shift in focus might impact the way students prepare for assessments?
Interesting question, Catherine. I think students might need to shift from memorization to understanding concepts more thoroughly. They would likely spend more time on projects, presentations, or portfolios that require them to apply their knowledge. But does this mean that traditional assessments no longer have a place in education?
Good point, Via. Traditional assessments still have their place, especially for evaluating foundational knowledge and understanding. However, authentic assessment go beyond that. They test the application of knowledge, which can be more meaningful in the long run. But this raises another questions. How can we effectively develop authentic assessment in the classroom?
Okay, so to develop authentic assessments, we need a solid framework. One approach is to start by identifying real-world tasks that align with the learning objectives. But here's a challenge. How do we ensure that tasks are fair and measurable for all students?
That's a crucial challenge, Brian. Fairness can be maintained by creating clear rubrics that define the criteria for success. Rubrics provide a consistent way to evaluate students' work. But there's something I've been thinking about. What if the real-world tasks don't directly match the learning objectives? How should we handle that?
That's a valid concern, Tyron. If there's a mismatch, we need to carefully select or modify the tasks to better align with the objectives. The goal is to ensure that the task not only represents real-world challenges, but also allows students to demonstrate the specific skills and knowledge we're assessing. But how do we know if this assessment development process is effective?
To evaluate the effectiveness of the assessment development process, we should pilot the assessment with a small group of students first. This allows us to see how well it measures the intended outcomes and make any necessary adjustments. But here's a thought. What role does student feedback play in refining authentic assessments?
So, students' feedback is essential. Essential via. It gives us insights into whether tasks were clear, relevant, or challenging. By incorporating this feedback, we can be more we can improve the assessment to the future classes. But to close our discussion, let me ask this. How can we balance the intensive nature of authentic assessments with the need to cover the curriculum?
That's a million question. That's the $1,000,000 question, Keith. I think the key lies in integrating authentic assessment strategy throughout the curriculum rather than using them exclusively. By combining them with traditional assessment, we can cover content while still engaging student meaningful real-world tasks. It's about finding the right mix.
So, alright. Everyone, let's start by discussing the nature and characteristic of authentic assessment. So, how would you describe authentic assessment in comparison to traditional assessment?
Good question, Keith. Authentic assessment is more about applying knowledge in real-world context, whereas traditional assessment often focuses on recalling information. But why do you think it's important for us as a future teachers to understand this distinction?
That's the key point, Brian. Understanding the distinction helps us tailor our teaching strategies to better prepare students for real-life situations. But here's a deeper question. How do the nature and characteristic of authentic assessment influence the way we should design our lesson?
Tyron, that's a great point. The nature of authentic assessment encourages us to design lessons that are more engaging and applicable to real-world scenarios. This means incorporating activities like projects, simulations, or problem-based learning. But then, how do we ensure that the assessments are valid and reliable across different teaching areas?
Catherine, ensuring validity and reliability is crucial. One way is by aligning the assessment task closely with the learning objectives and using clear rubrics. But I'm curious, how does the use of authentic assessment support the principles of high-quality assessment, such as accuracy and sampling?
Good question, Dia. Authentic assessment supports accuracy by focusing on what students can actually do with their knowledge, not just what they can remember, And in terms of sampling, it can cover broader range of skills and competencies. But this brings up another point. How can we differentiate between authentic assessment and traditional assessment in terms of their underlying principles?
Keith, differentiating them requires understanding their foundational goals. Traditional assessments are often about measuring specific knowledge, while authentic assessment aim to evaluate students' abilities to apply knowledge in real-world context. But what about the principles that guide the development? How do these principles shape the types of assessment tasks we choose?
Great question, Brian. The principles like relevance and realism in authentic assessment guide us to choose tasks that mirror real-life challenges. These principles push us to move beyond multiple choices tests to more complex tasks like case studies or portfolio. But here's something to consider. How do we make connection between the principle of high-quality assessment and the development of authentic assessment tools?
Tyron, making those connections is key to effective assessment design. By understanding high-quality assessment principles, we can develop authentic assessments that not only measure what matters but also do so in a fair and consistent way. But how do these connections impact the way we apply authentic assessments across different teaching areas?
That's a crucial question, Catherine. The impact is significant because these connections ensure that our assessments are not only relevant and engaging, but also applicable across various subjects. For example, in math, we might use problem-solving skills, while in history, we could use document-based questions. To wrap up, how do these learning objectives prepare us for our future roles as educators?
Good closing question, Dia. These objectives prepare us by ensuring we understand the value of authentic assessments and how to implement them effectively. They encourage us to create assessment that truly reflects students' ability and prepare them for real-world challenges. Ultimately, these skills will make us more effective and innovative educators.
Okay, so that's all.
So that's all.
That's all.
Thank you.
What a good,
What a
What a
nice,
good conversation.
yeah.
What a nice.
I learned a lot.
I learned a lot.